My name is Ulrika Patterson, and I am 28 years old. As I watch my 6-year-old son Lucas running through sprinklers in our backyard, I can't help but remember how my parents disowned me when I got pregnant. For 6 years, we built our life without them. Then suddenly, they appeared at my door demanding to be grandparents. When I established boundaries, they went to shocking extremes that threatened everything I had built. Let me know where you're watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to protect your family from toxic people. Trust me, what happened next will shock you. I grew up in Westbrook, Connecticut, a picture-perfect upper-middle-class neighborhood where appearances mattered more than anything else. My parents, Helen and Thomas Patterson, were pillars of the community. My mother led the women's ministry at First Presbyterian Church, and my father was an executive at Connecticut National Bank. Our family Christmas cards looked perfect, but behind closed doors, our home operated like a military academy. From my earliest memories, I understood that the Patterson name meant something in our town. It meant rigid rules, unattainable expectations, and the crushing weight of always being watched. My mother inspected my outfits before school each morning, rejecting anything she deemed too bright, too casual, or too revealing. Even at 8 years old, I had to represent the family properly. A Patterson girl never draws the wrong kind of attention. She would remind me while replacing my colourful hairbands with sensible brown ones that matched my uniform. My father was equally strict about academic performance. A 96% on a math test wasn't celebration worthy, it was a discussion about what happened to the missing 4%. Piano lessons weren't about musical enjoyment, but about competition and achievement. Dance classes weren't for fun, but for poise and discipline. The problem was I never quite fit their mold. I loved bright colours, daydreamed about becoming an artist, and questioned the rigid social hierarchies my parents enforced. My sister Amelia, 4 years younger, adapted better to their expectations. She knew how to smile at the right moments, wear the right clothes, and say the right things to our parents' friends. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" became a constant refrain in our household. The only person who saw me for who I really was my grandmother Eleanor, my father's mother. Unlike her son, she had a rebellious spark in her eyes and secretly encouraged my artistic interests. "Your spirit is what makes you special, Ulrika," she would whisper when my parents weren't listening. "Never lose that spark." When I was 16, my mother publicly humiliated me at a church fundraiser for wearing a dress she had actually approved that morning. Something about the lighting made it appear more sheer than it was, and rather than quietly addressing it, she loudly proclaimed to her friends that I was going through a phase and testing boundaries inappropriately. I stood frozen hot tears threatening to fall as the church ladies clucked sympathetically and offered my mother advice on dealing with rebellious teens. Nobody asked how I felt. Nobody noticed I was wearing the pearl necklace my mother had given me that morning or that I had spent hours helping set up the event. All they saw was my apparent failure to uphold the Patterson image. That night I cried in my grandmother Eleanor's arms. "Sometimes, my dear, the people who are supposed to love you the most see you the least," she said, stroking my hair. "But that doesn't mean you aren't worth seeing." Throughout high school, I became an expert at living two lives. The outward Ulrika who got straight A's played first chair violin in the orchestra and volunteered at appropriate charities. Then there was the real me who sketched designs in hidden notebooks, listened to music my parents would disapprove of, and dreamed of the day I could make my own choices. When college acceptance letters arrived, my parents had already planned my future at Dartmouth, where my father and grandfather had attended. But I had secretly applied to State University, which had an excellent arts program. When I received a partial scholarship, I presented it to my parents as a financially responsible decision. Reluctantly, with numerous conditions about maintaining their approved business major, they agreed. For the first time in my life, I tasted freedom. The campus was a 3-hour drive from home, just far enough that my parents couldn't drop in unexpectedly. I still called home twice weekly for their approval and sent my grade reports promptly, but in between those check-ins I discovered who I really was. My freshman roommate Diana Jackson was everything my parents would disapprove of. She had purple streaks in her hair, multiple piercings, and a loud, infectious laugh. She was also incredibly kind, fiercely loyal, and introduced me to a diverse group of friends who accepted me without question. "Girl, you hold yourself so tightly," Diana observed during our first week together. "Your shoulders are permanently up to your ears. You need to breathe." With Diana's encouragement, I started exploring campus life, beyond the business classes my parents had insisted upon. I discovered the art building with its smell of paint and clay, and for the first time I felt truly at home. By sophomore year, I had secretly enrolled in graphic design classes alongside my business major. I told myself I was still being practical, not pursuing fine arts, but a commercial creative field. Each semester became a careful balance of fulfilling my parents' expectations while nurturing my own dreams. I met Nate Reyes during junior year at a campus coffee shop where he performed acoustic sets on Thursday nights. With his soulful voice, easy smile, and carefree attitude, he represented everything my structured upbringing had lacked. He wore his heart on his sleeve and lived entirely in the moment. "You think too much about tomorrow," he told me on our third date, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. "Today is the only guarantee we have." Our relationship progressed quickly. Nate had grown up in foster care, bouncing between homes until aging out of the system at 18. He had no family obligations, no community judging his choices. His freedom was intoxicating to me. When my parents insisted on meeting him during Parents' Weekend, I knew it would be disastrous. My mother took one look at his tattoos and tight jaw and decided he was inappropriate. My father questioned his music career and lack of financial planning in a way that felt more like an interrogation than a conversation. "Is this some kind of rebellion?" my mother hissed in the parking lot afterward. "Because if it is, it needs to stop immediately." "He makes me happy," I said, finding a small voice of defiance. "Happiness isn't the point, Ulrika," my father replied coldly. "Success and reputation are what matter in this world." During senior year, I finally gathered the courage to officially change my major to graphic design. I had been taking extra classes and summer courses to fulfill both paths, but now I needed to commit to graduate on time. When my parents discovered the change at my graduation ceremony, the facade of family unity shattered. "You deliberately deceived us," my father said through a tight smile as we posed for photos. "We'll discuss this when we get home." That discussion turned into an ultimatum. Return to business school for a proper degree or lose their financial support. For the first time in my life, I chose myself. I moved in with Nate to his small apartment near campus, took out loans for my student debt, and accepted an entry-level position at a local marketing firm. Our life together wasn't glamorous. Nate performed at local venues while working at a music store, and I learnt the ropes of professional graphic design. We ate ramen noodles more often than not, but for the first time, I felt authentic. No pretending, no hidden sketchbooks, no walking on eggshells. 2 years into our relationship, the pregnancy test showed positive. When I first saw the 2 pink lines on the pregnancy test time seemed to stand still. Nate and I had been careful, but apparently not careful enough. I sat on the bathroom floor of our tiny apartment for what felt like hours, a storm of emotions swirling inside me. Fear came first. We were barely making ends meet, living paycheck to paycheck in a 1-bedroom apartment with second-hand furniture. How would we afford a baby? Then came waves of unexpected excitement. A child of my own, a chance to create the warm, accepting family I'd always wanted. Finally came dread about telling my parents, who still barely acknowledged my relationship with Nate. When Nate came home from his shift at the music store, I was still sitting on the couch, pregnancy test in hand. "Babe, everything okay?" he asked, setting down his guitar case. I wordlessly handed him the test. His eyes widened, then a slow smile spread across his face. "We're having a baby." The wonder in his voice made my heart swell. "Are you happy about this?" I asked cautiously. He knelt in front of me, taking my hands in his. "It's sooner than we planned, but yeah, I'm happy. We'll figure it out together." That night we talked until dawn, making plans and dreaming about our future as parents. Nate promised to pick up extra shifts, maybe even cut a demo with his band to send to record labels. I would continue working as long as possible, perhaps even freelance, from home after the baby came. For a few magical weeks, it felt like everything might work out. Then the morning sickness hit severe enough that I had to take unpaid time off. Medical bills started coming in, and the reality of our financial situation became impossible to ignore. "Maybe we should tell your parents," Nate suggested one evening after I'd spent the day throwing up. "They have money. They might help once they know about their grandchild." The thought made my stomach clench with anxiety, but he was right. Despite everything, they were my family. Maybe a grandchild would soften their hearts. We drove to Connecticut on a crisp autumn weekend. The maple trees lining my parents' driveway blazed with red and gold leaves, a stark contrast to the cold reception awaiting us inside. My mother opened the door, her face instantly hardening at the sight of Nate beside me. She led us to the formal living room, unused except for special guests and important conversations. My father joined us, standing by the fireplace rather than sitting, a physical reminder of the power dynamic. "What brings you here unannounced?" he asked, skipping pleasantries. I took a deep breath, one hand instinctively moving to my still flat stomach. "Mom, Dad, I have something important to tell you. I'm pregnant." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's face drained of color. My father's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching near his temple. "Is this some kind of joke?" my mother finally whispered. "No, I'm about 10 weeks along. The baby is due in spring." "And I assume you're the father." My father directed this at Nate with unconcealed contempt. Nate straightened his shoulders. "Yes, sir. We're planning to raise our child together." My mother stood abruptly. "Ulrika, may I speak with you in the kitchen alone?" In the kitchen, her composure cracked. "Do you have any idea what you've done, an unwed mother in this family? What will people think?" "I thought maybe you'd be happy about having a grandchild," I said, my voice small. She laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "Happy about a bastard child with that musician? You've always been selfish, but this takes the cake." When we returned to the living room, my father was pacing while Nate sat rigid on the edge of the sofa. "There's a simple solution here," my father announced. "You'll terminate this pregnancy, return to school for a business degree as we originally planned, and we can all forget this unfortunate situation." The room seemed to tilt. "What? No." "I'm keeping my baby." "Then you leave us no choice," he replied coldly. "If you insist on ruining your life with this child and that man, you'll do it without our support, financial or otherwise." "You can't mean that," I whispered, tears flowing freely now. "I'm your daughter." My mother's eyes were ice. "No daughter of mine would bring this kind of shame to our family. You made your choice." What followed still haunts my nightmares. My father went to his study and returned with a manila envelope. "These are the remaining possessions you left here. Your house key, the title to the car we purchased for you, which we'll be selling, and documentation showing we've removed you from all financial accounts and our will." My mother disappeared upstairs, returning with a small box containing childhood mementos. "Since you're no longer our daughter, you should take these. We won't be needing reminders." I stood frozen, unable to process their cruelty. Nate finally took the envelope and box, putting an arm around my shoulders. "She's your child," he said quietly, "and that's your grandchild. How can you turn your backs on them?" "Get out of our house," my father replied, "and don't come back." The drive home passed in a blur of tears and disbelief. Nate tried to comfort me, but his words sounded hollow against the echoing finality of my parents' rejection. By the time we reached our apartment, a numbness had settled over me, a protective shield against the pain. "They'll come around," Nate assured me, though uncertainty tinged his voice. "When the baby comes, they'll see how beautiful our family is, and they'll regret everything they said." I wanted to believe him, but deep down, I knew better. My parents valued image over love, conformity over acceptance. My pregnancy wasn't just a disappointment to them, it was unforgivable. As the weeks passed, Nate's initial excitement about fatherhood faded, replaced by a growing anxiety I recognized all too well. He started coming home later from gigs, avoiding conversations about baby preparations, disappearing for hours without explanation. Meanwhile, pregnancy complications forced me to reduce my work hours. My blood pressure was dangerously high, and the doctor ordered bed rest at 7 months. With my income drastically reduced, our financial situation became dire. My grandmother Eleanor was my lifeline during this time. Though in her 80s and living in an assisted living facility, she managed to visit secretly, bringing groceries and small amounts of cash she had hidden from my father. "They've forbidden me from seeing you," she confessed during one visit, her hands trembling with age and anger. "But you're my granddaughter, and this little one is my great-grandchild. Family doesn't abandon family." Sick. The morning I woke to find Nate gone is seared into my memory. No goodbye in person, just a hastily scrawled note on the kitchen counter. "I can't do this, Ulrika. I'm not ready to be a father. The band got an opportunity in Nashville. I'm sorry." Our joint bank account had been emptied except for $50. My phone buzzed with overdraft notifications from bills he had apparently paid before leaving, using every last cent we had. 7 months pregnant, on bed rest, abandoned, and now functionally homeless once the rent came due. I called the one person I knew would help. Diana arrived within the hour, helped me pack my essential belongings, and moved me into her spare room that same day. "We'll figure this out," she promised fury at Nate, evident in her every movement. You and the baby will be okay. My elderly neighbour, Mrs. Jenkins, who had often brought me soup when morning sickness was at its worst, packed up the remaining items from our apartment before the landlord could evict me. Diana's girlfriend Jasmine connected me with social services to apply for emergency assistance. Through it all, my parents maintained their silence. I called once desperate and afraid, only to have my mother hang up at the sound of my voice. I sent a letter with a sonogram picture that was returned unopened, marked refused, in my father's distinctive handwriting. The final betrayal came when I was 8 months along. Grandmother Eleanor had a stroke. I learned about it not from family, but from her nursing assistant, who called against explicit instructions not to contact me. When I arrived at the hospital, my father was there. "Get out," he said without looking at me. "You have no right to be here." "She's my grandmother," I said, my voice breaking. "And my mother. The doctors say it's only a matter of time. Don't make her final days about your drama." I left in tears, calling the hospital hourly for updates. 3 days later, Grandmother Eleanor passed away without me getting to say goodbye. I wasn't permitted to attend the funeral. 2 weeks after that, alone except for Diana serving as my birthing partner, I went into labour with my son. After 26 hours of grueling contractions and ultimate emergency C-section, Lucas Thomas. Patterson entered the world. 7 pounds, 4 ounces of perfect baby boy with a shock of dark hair and the strongest grip I'd ever felt when he wrapped his tiny fingers around mine. Looking into his eyes, I made him a promise. "It's just us now, little one, but I will love you enough for 2 parents, 4 grandparents, and the whole world combined. We're going to be okay." In that moment, despite everything, I believed it. The first weeks of motherhood were a blur of sleepless nights, painful C-section recovery, and overwhelming love for my tiny son. Diana's spare bedroom became our sanctuary, her daily help with Lucas allowing me brief naps between feedings. Without her, I'm not sure I would have survived those early days. "You're doing amazing," she would assure me when I broke down in exhausted tears at 3 a.m. "Every new mum feels this way, and most have more support than you do." Lucas was a good baby by most standards, but the isolation of new motherhood combined with the raw wounds of dual abandonment left me emotionally fragile. I jumped at every phone call, half expecting, half hoping it would be Nate returning or my parents having a change of heart. It never was. When Lucas was 3 weeks old, I received a certified letter from my parents' attorney informing me that any attempt to contact them would be considered harassment. The finality of it crushed what little hope I had been nurturing. That night, rocking Lucas in the darkness, I decided to stop looking backward and focus solely on creating a future for my son. Job hunting as a new mother proved nearly impossible. Interviews would go well until I mentioned needing a flexible schedule for my newborn. One hiring manager actually laughed when I asked about their parental leave policy, saying, "That's for employees who get pregnant after being hired, not for people who show up with a baby already in tow." After the 5th rejection, I pulled out my laptop while Lucas napped and opened my graphic design portfolio. If traditional employment wasn't an option, I would create my own opportunity. I set up a simple website offering freelance design services and reached out to every contact from my previous job. My first client was my former supervisor who needed wedding invitations designed. The job paid just enough to buy diapers for the week. My second client was a local coffee shop needing a new menu design. Slowly word spread about the quality of my work and my reliability despite being a new mum. I worked during Lucas's naps after his bedtime and sometimes with him sleeping in a wrap against my chest. My design station was a corner of Diana's dining table, then a small desk wedged into the corner of the spare room. It wasn't ideal, but it was a beginning. When Lucas was approaching his first birthday, the most unexpected blessing arrived in the form of my grandmother Eleanor's will. Despite my parents' attempts to have me removed as a beneficiary, my grandmother had updated her will just weeks before her passing, explicitly leaving me a modest inheritance. The attorney who contacted me explained that my grandmother had suspected my parents might try to prevent me from receiving my share. She had therefore created a separate trust specifically for me and my child that my parents couldn't touch. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough for a down payment on a small house in an affordable neighborhood and startup costs to formally establish my design business. "Your grandmother wanted you to know how proud she was of you," the attorney told me, handing me a sealed letter along with the legal documents. She said your courage in choosing your own path was something she had always wished for herself. The letter contained my grandmother's final words to me, written in her shaky hand. My dearest Ulrika, by the time you read this, I will be gone. Please know that your strength in the face of cruelty has been my greatest joy in my final years. The money I leave you is the least of your inheritance. Your true wealth is your compassionate heart and fierce spirit. Use both to raise your child with the love neither of us fully received. Find joy, create beauty, forgive when you can, but never at the expense of your worth. All my love, Grandmother Eleanor. I read the letter through tears, holding Lucas close. For the first time since learning of my pregnancy, I felt like I might actually be able to provide the life my son deserved. Our little house was nothing like the grand colonial I'd grown up in. Just 2 bedrooms with a small yard on a street where the neighbours were working-class families. The living room became my design studio by day and our cosy family space by night. Lucas's room I painted with a mural of twinkling stars and friendly animals, the kind of whimsical decor my parents would have deemed inappropriate. As Lucas grew from baby to toddler, I built my business reputation one client at a time. I specialized in branding for small businesses, creating logos, websites, and marketing materials. Working from home allowed me to be present for Lucas while still earning a living. It wasn't always easy, but it was ours. My support network expanded beyond Diana to include Jasmine, a single mother I met at a local playgroup, whose daughter Zoe was just 2 months older than Lucas. We took turns watching each other's children for appointments or deadline crunches. There was also Mrs. Jenkins, who had moved to the same neighbourhood after selling her condo. At 78, she became the grandmother figure Lucas deserved, babysitting occasionally, and teaching him to bake cookies just slightly too sweet and always oddly shaped. Family isn't always blood, Mrs. Jenkins would say, flour dusting her wrinkled cheeks as she helped Lucas roll cookie dough. Family is who shows up when it matters. And show up they did. When Lucas had a high fever at 18 months that required an emergency room visit, Diana drove us and waited for hours. When he took his first steps at 15 months, Jasmine and Zoe were there to cheer him on. When he spoke his first word, book, Mrs. Jenkins was reading to him. We created our own holiday traditions. Thanksgiving potluck with friends, Christmas morning, pancakes in the shape of snowmen, birthday cupcakes with sprinkles. Lucas got to apply himself, making a gloriously messy masterpiece each year. There were still painful reminders of what Lucas was missing. Father's Day projects at preschool brought tears I had to hide. Family tree assignments were carefully modified by his understanding teachers. And occasionally, I would spot my mother across the grocery store or at the mall, her eyes meeting mine briefly before she would turn and walk quickly in the opposite direction. I sent Christmas cards to my parents' address each year with photos of Lucas, and each year they were returned unopened. I heard through a distant cousin that my sister Amelia had married a surgeon in Boston, but I wasn't invited to the wedding. By the time Lucas started kindergarten, we had established a stable, happy life together. My design business had grown enough to hire a part-time assistant. We had moved from getting by to comfortable with a reliable car, regular pizza nights, and even an annual weekend trip to the beach. Lucas was thriving, a bright, curious boy with his father's easy smile and artistic talent that surely came from my side. The wounds of abandonment had scarred over. I rarely thought about Nate anymore, and while the pain of my parents' rejection never fully disappeared, it had dulled to an occasional ache, rather than the searing agony of those early days. I had accepted that Lucas and I were a complete family, just the two of us, surrounded by friends who had become our chosen family. Then came the Tuesday afternoon that changed everything. Lucas was at a playdate with Zoe. I was working on a deadline project when the doorbell rang. I opened the door without thinking and felt the world tilt beneath my feet. My parents stood on my porch, looking oddly out of place in their expensive clothes against the backdrop of my modest neighborhood. My mother clutched her designer handbag like a shield. My father stood ramrod straight, his expression unreadable. "Ulrika?" My mother said, her voice strangely hesitant. "May we come in?" In a daze, I stepped aside, watching as they entered my home and surveyed it with barely concealed judgment. "Quaint," my mother said, taking in the living room with its comfortable but worn sofa walls decorated with Lucas's artwork and my design workspace in the corner. My father nodded stiffly. "We heard you were doing well. Your own business, I understand." They settled onto the edge of my sofa, perched like birds ready to fly at the slightest disturbance. I sat across from them, heart pounding, mind racing with questions I couldn't voice. "Why are you here?" I finally managed my voice steadier than I felt. They exchanged a look, some silent communication passing between them. Your father had a heart attack 3 months ago, my mother said, her hand unconsciously moving to my father's arm. It was quite serious. They didn't think he would make it. For a moment, I felt a flicker of the daughter I had once been, concerned despite everything. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you okay now? My father nodded curtly. Full recovery expected, but it changes your perspective facing mortality. We've been doing some thinking, my mother continued. About family, about legacy. Another exchanged glance. We understand our grandson is now 6. My father said the word grandson, sounding foreign on his tongue. Lucas, I supplied. His name is Lucas. Yes, Lucas, my mother repeated, reaching into her purse. She withdrew several glossy photographs. We brought some things for him. She spread the photos on the coffee table. My parents' house, their boat at the lake house, their recent trip to Europe. We want him to know his heritage, she explained, where he comes from. My father cleared his throat. We've also set up an education fund, the best private schools, then college, of course. I stared at them, a creeping realization dawning. Why now? Why after 6 years of returning my letters and pretending I don't exist? Another uncomfortable exchange of glances. Well, my mother hesitated. The ladies at church have been showing pictures of their grandchildren at function after function, and I've had nothing to share. And your sister Amelia, my father added. She and Gregory have been trying for children, but the doctors say it's unlikely to happen. Something about her reproductive system. Which means, my mother continued, brightening slightly, that Lucas is our only grandchild, our legacy. The pieces clicked into place with stunning clarity. This wasn't about reconciliation or regret. This was about appearances and inheritance. My parents, faced with my father's mortality and no other grandchildren in sight, had decided Lucas was suddenly worthy of acknowledgement. We'd like to start spending time with him, my father announced. Weekend visits would be appropriate. We could take him to the country club, perhaps sailing this summer. And of course, the private school, my mother added. Westbrook Academy has an excellent kindergarten program. We've already spoken with the headmaster about a mid-year transfer. They continued making plans for my son, a child they'd never met, as if the past 6 years hadn't happened. As if they could simply walk into our lives and rearrange them to suit their preferences. Stop, I said finally, my voice cutting through their planning. Just stop. They looked at me with surprise, as if they'd forgotten I was there. Lucas doesn't know you, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. You've had 6 years to be his grandparents, and you chose not to be. You can't just appear and expect to take over his life. We're offering him opportunities you could never provide. My father said, a familiar condescension creeping into his tone. What I can provide is stability, unconditional love, and a home where he's never made to feel he has to earn affection, I replied. Something I never had growing up. My mother's lips thinned to a tight line. You're being difficult. I'm being a mother, I corrected. If you want a relationship with Lucas, you need to build one with me first. We need family counseling, clear boundaries, and a very gradual introduction. He's a child, not a possession or a photo opportunity. My father stood abruptly. I can see this was a mistake. You're clearly intent on punishing us by keeping our grandson from us. That's not what I said, I protested. I'm willing to consider a relationship, but it has to be on terms that protect Lucas. Using the child as a weapon, my mother murmured, gathering her purse. How disappointing, but not surprising. They left with thinly veiled threats about reconsidering the education fund and other options they might pursue. As I closed the door behind them, the familiar mixture of hurt, anger, and disappointment washed over me, but something else too. A steely resolve that hadn't existed the last time they walked out of my life. This time, I wasn't a frightened, pregnant girl with no resources. I was a mother, a business owner, a woman who had built a life from the ashes of abandonment. And I would not allow anyone, not even my parents, to threaten the stability I had created for my son. What I didn't realize then was just how far they would go to get what they wanted. The day after my parents' unexpected visit, a large package arrived addressed to Lucas. Inside were expensive toys, private school brochures, and a card signed, "From your loving grandparents," with their phone number. I set it aside, unsure how to handle this sudden intrusion into our lives. Before I could decide, my phone began ringing incessantly with calls from their number. I finally answered, explaining calmly that I needed time to process their reappearance and would contact them when I was ready to discuss next steps. My mother's response was chillingly familiar. We've given you enough time, Ulrika. 6 years of patience while you kept our grandson from us. You disowned me, I reminded her. You returned every letter and photo I sent. The past is the past, she replied dismissively. We're focused on Lucas's future now. Over the next week, the boundary violations escalated. My parents appeared unannounced at our front door 3 times. Each time, fortunately, Lucas was either at school or at a friend's house. Their calls increased to hourly, then switched to different numbers when I blocked them. I consulted with my therapist, Dr. Matthews, whom I had been seeing since Lucas was 2. Her advice was firm. This is not healthy behavior, she said. Your instinct to establish clear boundaries is correct. Their approach shows they haven't changed in any meaningful way. With her guidance, I drafted an email outlining my conditions for rebuilding a relationship family counseling. Before any meeting with Lucas, respect for my parental authority and an acknowledgement of the pain their abandonment had caused. I proposed starting with weekly video calls between just us adults to rebuild trust. My father's response was brief. We reject these unreasonable terms. We'll be in touch with alternative arrangements. The implied threat sent a chill down my spine. The following Monday, I received a call from Lucas's school. Someone claiming to be his grandmother had tried to pick him up, insisting she was authorized. She was quite upset when we refused, the school secretary explained. She said we were keeping her from her legal right to see her grandson. My hands shook as I thanked the secretary for following protocol. That evening, I sat Lucas down for an age-appropriate conversation about safety. Buddy, there are some people who might try to talk to you or pick you up from school, but they're not on our safe list. Remember, you only go with me, Mrs. Jenkins or Jasmine, unless I tell you specifically about a change. His little face grew serious, like stranger danger. Something like that, I said, heartbreaking that I had to have this conversation. These people might say they're related to us, but you haven't met them yet. If anyone says they're your grandparents, you tell your teacher right away, okay. He nodded solemnly, then brightened. Can we have ice cream now? I hugged him tight, grateful for his resilience and the simple joys of childhood that remained untainted by adult complications. The next assault came at my workplace. I was meeting with a new client at a local coffee shop when my parents walked in, spotting me immediately. There you are, my mother announced loudly. We've been trying to reach you about your son. The client looked confused as my parents approached our table. I'm in a business meeting, I said quietly but firmly. This isn't appropriate. Nothing about your behavior is appropriate, my father replied, his voice carrying across the shop. Keeping a child from his grandparents. Everyone should know what kind of person you really are. People were staring now. My client shifted uncomfortably. Perhaps we should reschedule, she murmured, gathering her materials. After she left, I faced my parents directly. You just cost me a client. This has to stop. It stops when you stop being unreasonable, my mother replied. We have rights as grandparents. That evening, I researched grandparent rights and discovered with alarm that our state did have laws allowing grandparents to petition for visitation under certain circumstances. Though typically these applied to cases where parents were divorced or one parent had died, the vague language about best interests of the child left me uneasy. The situation escalated when packages for Lucas began arriving daily, each more extravagant than the last. Notes accompanied them about plans for sailing lessons, horseback riding, and trips to Europe, all creating expectations I had no intention of fulfilling. Then came the day I discovered someone had been gathering information about us. A neighbour mentioned casually that someone claiming to be conducting a neighbourhood satisfaction survey had asked detailed questions about my work hours, Lucas's schedule, and whether he played outside unsupervised. With growing dread, I installed security cameras and a doorbell camera. I changed our routines, dropping Lucas at school at different times and using different routes. I informed his teachers and after-school program about the situation, providing photos of my parents and explicit instructions that Lucas was not to be released to them under any circumstances. The breaking point came when I discovered through a business contact that someone had been calling my clients, claiming I was involved in a family emergency and would be unavailable indefinitely. 2 clients had already cancelled projects, citing concerns about my reliability. Then came the formal letter from an attorney specialising in family law representing my parents in their petition for grandparent visitation rights. The letter cited my unstable lifestyle and attempts to alienate the child from loving grandparents as justification. Attached was a detailed dossier that chilled me to the bone, Photos of our house, Lucas playing at the park, me loading groceries into my car. Notes about Lucas's school schedule, his friends, even his favorite playground equipment. They had been watching us, documenting our lives, building a case. The final paragraph suggested we could avoid costly legal proceedings if I agreed to their original terms: weekend visitations, private school enrollment, and appropriate involvement in the child's upbringing. My hands shook so badly I could barely dial Diana's number. "They're trying to take him," I sobbed when she answered. "They've been stalking us." Diana arrived within the hour, reviewed the letter, and made 2 immediate calls. One to her cousin, who was a police officer, and another to a family law attorney she knew from college. "This is harassment, possibly stalking," she said firmly. "We're not letting them intimidate you." The next morning, strange notifications appeared on my business website. Anonymous reviews claiming unprofessional conduct. Emails from my web hosting company about complaints regarding my site. A call from my landlord asking about concerns that had been raised about a business being operated from a residential property. "It's a coordinated attack," Diana's cousin explained after reviewing everything. "They're trying to destabilize your life, make you desperate enough to accept their terms." The attorney she recommended, Sandra Wang, was blunt in her assessment. "They're counting on you not having the resources to fight them. People like your parents believe money wins everything, including custody battles. Can they really take Lucas from me?" I asked the question that had been keeping me awake at night. "No," Sandra assured me. "You're a fit parent with no history of abuse or neglect. But they can make your life very difficult while trying, and they might secure some visitation rights if the judge is sympathetic." We began documenting every incident, every boundary violation. I started carrying a small notebook to record dates, times, and details of every interaction and attempted contact. Diana and Mrs. Jenkins provided witness statements about my parenting and Lucas's well-being. Lucas's teachers contributed letters attesting to his adjustment and happiness at school. Then came the anonymous call to Child Protective Services alleging neglect and possible exposure to inappropriate individuals. The investigation was terrifying, even with Sandra's assurance that such tactics were common in high-conflict custody disputes. The CPS worker, a kind but thorough woman named Ms. Thompson, inspected our home, interviewed me extensively, and observed my interactions with Lucas. "I see a lot of troubled homes in my work," she told me privately after completing her assessment. "This isn't one of them. You have a lovely relationship with your son. Unfortunately, we're required to investigate every report, which is why these calls are such an effective harassment tool." The case was closed as unfounded, with Ms. Thompson noting in her report her suspicion of malicious reporting for purposes unrelated to child welfare concerns. The final confrontation happened at Lucas's 6th birthday party. We had planned a small celebration at the local park with a dinosaur theme, just friends from school and our small circle of close adults. I had hired a teenager from the neighborhood to do face painting and borrowed a dinosaur piñata from Jasmine. We were midway through cake when my parents appeared, carrying large wrapped gifts and wearing the benevolent smiles of doting grandparents. "There's our birthday boy," my mother called out, approaching our picnic table. Lucas shrank against me, recognizing them from the safety photos I had reluctantly shown him. "Mom," he whispered, uncertain and a little afraid. Before I could respond, Diana and Jasmine had positioned themselves between my parents and our table. "You need to leave," Diana said firmly. "You weren't invited." "It's a public park," my father replied coldly, "and that's our grandson." "Who doesn't know you and is clearly uncomfortable," Jasmine pointed out. My mother attempted to step around them. "Lucas, sweetheart, we're your grandma and grandpa. We've brought special presents just for you." Lucas began to cry, clinging to me. The other children looked confused and upset. Parents were gathering their things, sensing the tension. I stood, handing Lucas to Mrs. Jenkins, who immediately took him and the other children to the playground area away from the confrontation. "This is enough," I said, anger finally overcoming fear. "You're ruining my son's birthday. You're scaring him. Is that what you want?" "We want what's best for him," my father insisted. "No, you want what's best for you," I replied. "You want a do-over because you failed with your own children. You want a trophy grandchild to show off at church. You want control." "How dare you?" my mother hissed. "No, how dare you?" I countered, years of hurt crystallizing into righteous anger. "How dare you abandon me when I needed you most, then reappear expecting to claim my son? How dare you stalk us, harass us, and try to destroy the life I've built? How dare you scare a 6-year-old on his birthday?" Ada's parents from the party had formed a protective circle around us. One dad whose son was in Lucas's class stepped forward. "I'm a police officer," he said quietly, "and you're causing a disturbance. I suggest you leave before this becomes official." My father's face reddened. "This isn't over," he said, pointing a finger at me. "Our attorney will be in touch." As they stormed away, the birthday party in ruins, I made a decision. This cycle of harassment and fear had to end. The following morning, I called Sandra Wang. "I want a restraining order, and I want to move somewhere they can't find us. I don't care what it costs." The legal battle had begun, but for the first time, I wasn't fighting alone. The process of obtaining a restraining order against my own parents felt surreal, like watching someone else's life unfold. Sandra Wang's office became a command center for documentation. The log of unwanted contacts I had kept statements from witnesses to their harassment, the school's report about the attempted pickup evidence of the business sabotage, and most damning, the photos proving they had been surveilling Lucas and me. "Your case is strong," Sandra assured me, reviewing the thick file. "What they've done goes beyond a family disagreement into clear harassment and stalking territory." The temporary restraining order was granted immediately, barring my parents from coming within 500 feet of Lucas, me, our home, or my workplace. The judge scheduled a hearing for a permanent order 2 weeks later. "Be prepared," Sandra warned. "They'll likely hire an aggressive attorney who will try to paint you as unstable and vindictive. They'll claim they just want a relationship with their grandchild and you're being unreasonable." She was right. The courtroom confrontation was brutal. My parents' attorney, a sharp-suited man with a reputation for scorched earth family law tactics, portrayed them as doting grandparents cruelly cut off from their only grandchild by a daughter holding a grudge. "These are upstanding members of the community," he argued smoothly, "who have only the best intentions toward their grandson. They've offered financial support, educational opportunities, and family connections that would greatly benefit the child." When my turn came, Sandra methodically presented our evidence. The timeline of harassment, the school incident reports, the business interference, the CPS call that was determined to be unfounded and malicious. Finally, photos of Lucas crying at his birthday party as my parents attempted to approach him. "This isn't about grandparent rights," Sandra concluded. "It's about control and appearances." They disowned their daughter during her pregnancy, returned all attempts at contact for 6 years, then suddenly reappeared, demanding immediate access to a child who doesn't know them. When denied, they embarked on a systematic campaign of harassment and intimidation. My parents sat stone-faced throughout the proceedings, occasionally whispering to their attorney or shaking their heads in apparent disbelief at my testimony. My mother dabbed at dry eyes with a tissue for the judge's benefit. When the judge addressed me directly, I felt a momentary panic. "Ms. Patterson, are you categorically opposed to your son having any relationship with his grandparents in the future?" I took a deep breath, remembering Dr. Matthews' advice to speak honestly but calmly. "Your Honour, I believe every child benefits from loving family relationships." If my parents demonstrated genuine remorse for their abandonment, respected appropriate boundaries, and were willing to build trust gradually through family counselling, I would consider a carefully supervised relationship. But their current behaviour shows they view Lucas as a possession to be acquired, not a child whose emotional well-being must be protected. The judge nodded thoughtfully. "And Mr. and Mrs. Patterson, would you be willing to engage in family counselling and a gradual introduction process, as your daughter suggests?" My father's response was immediate and cold. "We've done nothing wrong. We shouldn't have to jump through hoops to see our grandson." That statement, more than all our carefully gathered evidence, seemed to crystallize the situation for the judge. His expression hardened. "The court grants the permanent restraining order to," he announced. "Mr. and Mrs. Patterson are to remain 500 feet from their daughter and grandson, their home workplaces and schools, for a period of 1 year. Additionally, all contact must cease, including phone calls, emails, social media, or communication through third parties." He fixed my parents with a stern gaze. "This court takes a dim view of harassment disguised as grandparental concern. If you wish to pursue a healthy relationship with your grandson in the future, I strongly suggest you reflect on your approach and consider the counselling your daughter has proposed." The restraining order provided immediate relief but didn't solve our long-term safety concerns. That evening, with Lucas asleep under Diana's watchful eye, I met with Sandra to discuss next steps. "They'll likely lay low for a while after the court ruling," she advised, "but I'm concerned they might escalate once the restraining order expires." People who view relationships as possessions often become more determined when legally challenged. We developed a comprehensive safety plan. I changed my phone number and email addresses. I redirected my business website to a temporary page citing a site update, while establishing a new business identity with a P.O. box address. Most significantly, I put our small house on the market and began searching for a home in a different school district. Within 6 weeks, we had moved to a modest but comfortable rental house 20 miles away in a gated community with good security. Lucas transferred to a new school where the administration was fully briefed on the situation. I worked remotely for several weeks, slowly rebuilding client relationships that had been damaged by my parents' interference. The transition was hard on Lucas. At 6, he couldn't fully understand why we had to leave our home, his friends, and his familiar routines. "Are the bad people going to find us here?" he asked one night after we moved, his small voice tinged with fear. I held him close, heartbreaking that his childhood now contained this anxiety. "No, sweetheart, we're safe here. The judge made sure of that." "But why did those people want to take me away? Did I do something wrong?" "Absolutely not," I assured him. Some adults make bad choices because of their own problems, not because of anything children do. Remember how we talked about big feelings and how important it is to handle them in healthy ways. Those people have big feelings they haven't learned to handle properly. This explanation, simplified for his understanding, seemed to satisfy him temporarily, but I knew the questions would return as he grew older. Dr. Matthews helped me develop age-appropriate ways to discuss the situation, emphasizing that he was loved safe and that the conflict was never about him. Both Lucas and I began regular therapy sessions to process the trauma of the past months. His sessions focused on play therapy to address his new fears and anxiety, while mine helped me manage the complex emotions of being both a daughter and a mother in this impossible situation. In therapy, I confronted my lingering grief over being abandoned twice, first during pregnancy and again when I finally established boundaries. I worked through guilt about Lucas not having grandparents and fear about my ability to break the cycle of toxic family dynamics. "You've already broken the cycle," Dr. Matthews pointed out. "You chose your son's well-being over appeasing your parents. You're teaching him that love doesn't require surrendering your boundaries or dignity." Gradually, our new life took shape. Lucas made friends at his new school. I rebuilt my business under a slightly different name, focusing on clients outside our former geographic area. We established new routines and traditions, creating security through consistency. 6 months after the restraining order was granted, an unexpected development occurred. My sister Amelia contacted me through Sandra's office, requesting a meeting. We met at a coffee shop halfway between our homes, the first time we'd seen each other in over 7 years. She looked the same, but different, more polished in her expensive clothes, but with new worry lines etched around her eyes. "I should have reached out sooner," she said immediately, voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry, Ulrika." The apology unlocked something in me, tears flowing freely as we sat across from each other. "They told me you wanted nothing to do with the family," she explained. "That you'd run off with your boyfriend and wanted to cut all ties. I believed them until I found your returned letters in Dad's study." Amelia shared her own struggles with our parents. Her seemingly perfect marriage to Gregory, the surgeon they approved of, had come with invisible chains. Their inability to conceive had triggered increasing pressure and criticism from our parents. When she finally stood up to them about their treatment of me, they had threatened to cut her off financially as well. "I was a coward," she admitted. "I stayed silent to keep the peace to maintain my comfortable life. But after hearing about the restraining order, I couldn't stay silent anymore." She passed me a thick envelope. "These are copies of everything I could find about their plans regarding Lucas. Attorney communications notes from the private investigator they hired, everything. I thought it might help you stay protected." This unexpected ally brought both practical help and emotional healing. Though Amelia and I decided to maintain some distance for her safety and ours, we established a careful communication channel through secure email. For the first time in years, I had a connection to my birth family that wasn't tainted by manipulation or control. As the 1-year mark of the restraining order approached, we prepared for the possibility of renewed contact attempts. Sandra filed for an extension based on the documented history and ongoing safety concerns. To our surprise, there was no opposition from my parents' attorney. Instead, I received a formal letter through Sandra's office. My parents requested permission to send a written communication reviewed by my attorney, first outlining their reflections and proposed path forward. The letter, when it arrived, contained something I never expected: an acknowledgement of wrongdoing. We recognize that our approach to reconnecting with you and Lucas was deeply flawed, they wrote. Our actions caused fear and disruption to your lives, which was never our intention. We have begun working with a family therapist to better understand appropriate boundaries and communication. If you would consider family counseling at some point in the future, we would participate with an open mind. Sandra was skeptical. People don't change overnight. This could be a strategy to improve their position if they pursue legal action again. Dr. Matthews offered a more nuanced view. It could be sincere, it could be tactical, or it could be somewhere in between. The question is whether you're willing to explore the possibility of a healthier relationship with strong boundaries in place. After much consideration, I drafted a careful response, setting clear conditions for any future contact, continued therapy on their part, family counseling with a neutral therapist, before any introduction to Lucas, and absolute respect for my parental authority and boundaries. I make no promises about the outcome, I concluded. My priority remains Lucas's emotional well-being and our family's safety. Any relationship must develop naturally and at a pace that feels secure for both of us. Whether this marked the beginning of genuine healing or simply another phase in our complicated family history remained to be seen. But for the first time, I faced the future without fear. I had proven to myself and to Lucas that boundaries were not just permissible, but necessary, that love didn't require submission, and that family in its truest sense was defined by actions rather than blood. As Lucas and I planted a small garden at our new home that spring, carefully setting tender seedlings into the soil, I saw it as a metaphor for our journey. We were putting down new roots, creating beauty from difficult circumstances, and nurturing growth that would sustain us through seasons to come. "Will these grow big, Mom?" Lucas asked, patting soil around a tiny tomato plant. "With care and patience," I replied, watching my remarkable son, the unexpected gift, who had taught me the true meaning of unconditional love. The strongest things often start small. Have you ever had to set boundaries with family members who didn't respect your parenting decisions? Do you think it's possible for toxic relationships to truly heal, or is maintaining distance sometimes the healthiest choice? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories about finding strength in difficult family situations. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the family we choose is more important than the family we're born into.